Hi there, and welcome home. Here on Home with the Harrisons, we make content based on our many hobbies. For my husband, that's more philosophy and gaming. If you're interested in Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition at all, go ahead and go check out some of our videos on that game. We're doing a playthrough right now, and it is fun stuff. For me, that tends to be more cooking and some lifestyle stuff as well. If any of that sounds interesting to you at all, go ahead and check out our other content or hit the subscribe button if you like. We upload a new video every week, usually on Mondays. And sometimes there are bonus videos. Today on Cooking with Jessie, by the way, if I haven't seen you before, my name's Jessie. Hi. We are going to be making bread. I am starting a little mini-series here on my Cooking with Jessie series about recipes that are easy to make, easy to memorize, and use mostly ingredients that you have in your cupboard. Well, I have in my cupboard. Can't make any blanket statements about your cupboards, but they're pretty simple pantry ingredients that we can make. And today we're making bread. Now, bread at its most basic has 4 ingredients: water, flour, salt, and yeast. And today the bread we're making, we'll be adding 2 extra ingredients, and that's oil. I like to use olive oil in mine, and sugar. And that's because I am impatient getting the yeast going, and sugar makes it happen a little faster. If you have all those ingredients, congratulations, you have everything you need to make a really simple bread that everybody's going to be pretty impressed by. Let's get cooking. Alright, now that I've got you zoomed in a little bit, we are going to start with the first steps for making the bread, and that is waking up the little yeasties. I am going to use 2 cups of warm water. If you're not sure about temperatures, you want to make sure that it is not higher than 110 degrees Fahrenheit. That will kill the yeast if you have it over that. When I was first starting making bread, I had a thermometer in our house that was regularly just set to go, just to use to measure my water to make sure I wasn't killing my yeast. I've gotten a little bit better at just touching my finger in and seeing if it's tepid or, too hot, but that's something, like a lot of things with bread, that you're just going to get a feel for eventually. Bread is one of those things that doesn't necessarily require an exact recipe for the chemistry to go right, but it does require some practice. Now, I am going to use about a tablespoon, if I can get enough in my, there we go, about a tablespoon of yeast in that warm water. The other thing that you want to check about your water is see if your water has a high chlorine content. If it does, you're going to want to let your water sit for about an hour and then bring it up to that warmer temperature, because chlorine is volatile, it'll seep out into the air, but you don't want that chlorine in your water killing the yeasties, which is its job after all, to kill the little microorganisms in your water. But we like these microorganisms. They make bread nice and soft and fluffy. I'm going to put a tablespoon of sugar in at this time as well. And then just to make it really simple, I've got my flour over here. We're going to put about a tablespoon of flour in now as well. So far, just to recap, we've got a tablespoon of yeast, a tablespoon of sugar, and a tablespoon of flour with 2 cups of warm water, not too hot. Remember, we don't want to kill the yeast. And I am going to, oh, I left my whisk back there. I'll be right back. Here it is. I'm going to whisk this up. And now what the sugar and the flour do is they give the yeast something to eat and to start reproducing and making that gas. It just makes the rise happen a lot faster when it does start than starting from just dry ingredients. And then the water being warm also helps the yeast wake up faster. So this right here, this first step, we're going to take 10 minutes. And you think, oh man, that's 10 extra minutes to making bread, which is a long process, but it's going to make the rest of the process happen that much faster. All right, I will be back in 10 minutes and we will see what this looks like. Well, it's been about 10 minutes, a few extra. I went out and picked some tomatoes and got them ready to oven dry so we can make some focaccia with this bread dough later. And it is foaming up nicely. Now, if your yeast is not expired, you will see a nice head of foam on top, and you might see some of the flour and the sugar and other stuff settled on the bottom. That's fine. What we were really looking for is this nice head of foam, and we want it to be a little bit thicker than it was when we started. So our yeast have gotten a nice chance to relax and wake up and start eating and farting. And I am just going to stir this up again with my whisk, and then I'm going to pour this straight into my stand mixer. This was a very amazing Christmas gift from my parents last year, and I absolutely love it. If you do use a stand mixer for kneading your dough, you're going to want something called a dough hook. It looks like this, and it is very, very helpful for kneading your dough. Now, I've got most of our liquid stuff in there. There's the coffee. Let me start getting some of our dry ingredients in. So far, just to recap, we've got 2 cups of warm water. We've got 1 tablespoon each of sugar, flour, and yeast in there. To that, we are adding a couple of glugs of oil. Well, let me measure this time. I think it comes out to 2 tablespoons. 1, 2. Ooh, that was a fun noise. And then about, look at that, left the salt back there when I was salting my tomatoes. About a tablespoon also of salt. If you are on a low salt diet, you can go ahead and use less than that tablespoon, but you don't want to use no salt, because bread without salt doesn't taste very good. Ask me how I know. Why, thank you for asking. I know this because I accidentally forgot to salt a few times, and it was terrible and almost inedible, even with extra salt added with the butter when I was trying to eat it. So disappointing, because it smelled like delicious fresh bread, and then I took a bite into it, and it did not taste like delicious fresh bread. Alright, so we've added our 2 tablespoons of oil and our tablespoon of salt. Now we want to add really quickly our 5 cups of flour. Now I happen to know that the scoop that came with this enormous flour canister, if I get a heaping scoopful, it's about 1 1/4 cups. So I'm going to add 4 of these in there. If you are unsure of what you're doing, or you've never made bread before, go ahead and start off with 4 or 4 1/2 cups when you're first starting to knead. Your area might be different than mine. I know I live in a very humid area, so I might need to use more flour than you do, because the water from the air is getting into my dough. Now let's see if that's good. I'm going to put my stand mixer down. It is plugged in, wonderful. And I am going to turn it to one of the lower settings. Now the other thing that's amazing about this stand mixer is that it came with all the accessories. If you have one of the fancier ones and you don't have a dough hook, and you don't have one of these covers here, or you don't have a stand mixer at all, you can go ahead and knead it by hand. That's easy enough to do, and I usually end up finishing it out by hand kneading anyway, so I'll show you guys how I usually do that when this is done kneading. This will take about, well, it usually takes about 5 to 10 minutes to knead to a cohesive ball where I can then, take my rings off and get into the dough and make sure it's nice and smooth and well kneaded. So I will see you guys back once that is ready. All right, well, we're back, and it's been almost 10 minutes. Look at that. I was right. So I'm going to turn this off, and I am going to open this up. Look at that. Woo! That is some heavy dough right there. Now, if you are just starting out making bread and you took my advice earlier and you only added the 4 or 4 1/2 cups of flour and it's seeming kind of squishy, go ahead and add more flour until it gets to the point where you really want it to be. I'm going to take my rings off because I'm actually being intelligent this time. I've got my ring so full of bread dough so many times. Let's face it, if you don't know I'm a mess by now, you never will. All right, so I'm going to dump this dough onto the counter. Now we are going to get to work kneading it. Now, the way that I usually do this is a pushing with the heels of both hands motion, and then you fold and push, and you keep folding and pushing. And you want it to be nice and smooth. You want it to be not so stiff that it's not pliable, but you don't want it to be so wet that it's oozing all over. You want it to be able to hold a shape a little bit, but we're going to use molds for our bread anyway, so it doesn't need to be able to hold its shape perfectly. And a wetter dough will poof up more when you bake it. All right, so I'm just sitting here kneading this bread. And eventually, you'll start to see the outside starting to look pretty, well, it's not perfectly smooth. But after a few minutes of kneading, it'll look really, really smooth. There might be a few dimples here and there. But this is your loaf, or your ball of dough. So what I do at this point is I rinse out one of these, or I could go get an extra one if I wanted to make more dishes for myself. I'll rinse out the bowl that I used to mix the dough. I will spray it with some oil or non-stick spray, and I'll spray the dough as well. And then I will cover it with a wet cloth, not wet, damp. You're going to want to wet the cloth and then wring it out until it's just damp. And then you're going to want to put it into an area that is still fairly warm and free of any cold spots or drafts. You don't want the temperature to change a lot while this is rising. A warm place that has an even temperature will help the yeast grow and, you know, pass all those little gas bubbles into the dough. Much better than a place that's drafty or has random cold spots or anything like that. So I'm going to go do that. I'm going to go rinse and oil the bowl and the dough. I'm going to put a damp cloth over the bowl, and then when it has gone through its first rise, I will be back to talk you through punching down, which is exactly as fun as it sounds in my opinion. Okay, we are back, and the dough has gotten bigger. You can see is much bigger than that little piece of dough that we had. Oh goodness, the terrible thing about having cats is they get their hair everywhere no matter how many times you clean up after them. So I am going to punch this down, which is, okay, it's not as, you can punch it, it'll work the same, but all you need to do is get the big bubbles out of your dough. And today what I'm going to be making this bread into, this dough into, is pizza and focaccia dough. So I am going to just cut this into about 2 equal pieces. And then this is going to be for the pizzas. Now I'm going to cut that in half again because we're going to have 2 small pizzas, I think. There we go. Got 2 small pieces for our small pizzas. And this is going to be for our focaccia. Now I am going to knead this just a little bit to get the oil that we coated it with sort of incorporated in. Once it is smooth again, I'm going to let it rest about 5 to 10 minutes and then just pat it out in a slightly flat circular shape, and I will let it rest and rise for about half an hour. And I might look a little different the next time you see me because we have a wedding that we need, well, wedding reception that we need to go to, and I am really bad at time management, so I'm going to let this rest about 5 to 10 minutes, and then I will be back to shape it finally. These are going to be the last things that I bake up today, the pizzas, so not even worried about those right now. They will go ahead and chill back in the bowl with damp cloth over it. This dough, let me make sure you can see it. This dough right here, this is going to just rest on the counter here for another 5 to 10 minutes, like I said, so that it can let some of that gluten relax a little bit and I can shape it better. All right, I will see you in 5 to 10 minutes. Well, it has been a little bit more than the 10 minutes that I said it was going to be. I've got this relaxed. If you see, as I pull it out, it seems a lot less like it's struggling against me. Maybe you can't see that. I am doing my own camera work today, so I am sorry if you can't see things on the edge of the screen, because I don't have hubby here to make sure that everything's visible. But hopefully you can see, I can lift it up a little bit, you can see that it sort of can be pulled a little bit more. That's what you want. You want the dough to be able to be pulled just a little bit more. So that's what you're waiting for on that rest. So I am going to shape this dough into a vague round shape. And I am going to grease a pizza pan. Let me get that. I am just terrible about having my stuff out and ready today, aren't I? I am absolutely awful about having my stuff out and ready today. So I am going to take my nonstick spray and just spray down the pan. And I am going to put this shape, this round shape. Oh man, looks like another cat hair. Seriously, like if you live with a cat, there's no getting around it. You just got to be really, really vigilant, right? And yep, it's in a vague round shape that'll puff up a little bit. So we're going to let this raise, and I'm going to get another damp cloth to put over it while it's raising. We're going to let it raise for about half an hour to 45 minutes. At that point, my oven-dried tomatoes that I'm making today to put on this focaccia will be ready to go, and we can make some pretty designs, use some of the basil that I'm growing, and make a beautiful focaccia bread. I was talking to my kids earlier about, we're going to have this for dinner tomorrow because, you know, Joe and I are going out to a very, very small reception tonight, and our plans for dinner are already made there. So, but I was telling them what focaccia was, and they were both very, very excited. I have the strangest kids. They get so excited about trying new things. Does anybody else have kids like that, where they actually like to try new things? I feel like kids get a bad rap for not enjoying trying new things. I don't know. Maybe it's just my kids. My kids are weird. That's entirely possible. They are my kids after all. So anyway, we've got the vague round shape, and I'm going to wet this cotton cloth, getting it nice and wet in the sink here. I'm making sure to wring it out so it's not too wet. And then I am going to lightly place it over that shaped dough. Now what you could do after punching down, instead of shaping it right away, is you could punch down the dough, which remember is just pressing down hard enough to release all those big air bubbles, so the air bubbles are nice and even in your dough. And then you can let it raise for another half an hour to 45 minutes. That tends to develop the flavors a little bit more. That nice fermented yeasty flavor gets a little bit stronger if you do a second proofing or raising, also called proofing. But in this case, again, I'm terrible with time management, so I have to quick get ready for this wedding reception that we are going to today. And I am going to put this on top of the oven, and in about half an hour to 45 minutes, we will put the things on top of it. Garlic, cheese, oven-dried tomatoes that I'm making right now, basil probably, to make it a focaccia. I'll be back. All right, so I have clearly done a little bit to that round of bread dough since the last time you saw it. Like I said, I'm doing my own camera work. Hopefully you actually saw it. I happen to have some tomatoes in my garden that the birds were just eating because it's been an overwhelming year, and having everyone home means I have less time to do things that I usually do when I'm at home, like garden, because I'm taking care of everybody else who's at home. And it's great. It's fine. That's why I stay home, but the garden has been going to the birds a little bit. So I went out and I grabbed some of those tomatoes and I salted them and put them in a 200-degree oven for somewhere between 2 and 3 hours. And that's how I got my own oven-dried tomatoes. Now, you might not have that. You might have something completely different. That's the great thing about focaccia. It's basically refrigerator glue. What do you have leftovers that would go well on a focaccia bread that you need to get out of your fridge? Well, go ahead and make this dough because it's super simple and you can put whatever you want on it. I happen to have some mozzarella that is it's getting kind of old. And of course I have my basil plant on my table, and so that's where the basil came from. I put some garlic and olive oil and Parmesan cheese and then those oven-dried tomatoes that I made today. And I got fancy with the spices. I made cute little flower shapes. You obviously don't have to do that. I just thought it would be pretty. So yeah, I've got this all set. It's still proofing. Bench proofing once it's shaped is the technical term. And right now I am preheating the oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. I also have sprayed some water on the inside of my oven. If you have one of those fancy steam injection ovens that are perfect for making bread, awesome. I'm a little jealous. I don't have one of those. And so when I'm making bread, in order to get a nice crust on it, I tend to just spray water on it. So I will be back once the oven is preheated and it's time to put this beautiful piece of bread with toppings, this lovely focaccia, into the oven. And I will see you guys back here then. All right, so my oven is preheated to 425 degrees Fahrenheit, and I've got my focaccia all dressed and ready to go. So I'm gonna quick put that in the oven. How good does that look? Doesn't that look great? Wait till it gets all brown and gooey. I'm putting it on the bottom shelf, and before I close everything, I'm going to take my spray bottle that I just filled, and I am going to spray water in here. Like I said, if you have like a steam injection oven, I'm so jealous, but I do not. So I tend to monitor this, and I put on 10 minutes at a time of my timer, and every 10 minutes I open up the door and I spray water in again. Now you don't have to do it as often as I do if you don't like a crust that's thick and chewy and soft, fully cooked bread on the inside, but nice chewy crust on the outside. But in my opinion, if you're making homemade bread, you might as well go all the way and get that nice, beautiful brown, chewy crust on the outside. So I do that every 10 minutes. I'm spraying with the spray bottle until the bread is done, and I will show you what that looks like when we are all done. So as you can see, this is a recipe that is super simple to make, and yes, I still have this recipe memorized.
Hey guys, Editing Joe here. Just inserting a little summary of some flubbed dialogue. In general, we just want you to know that this bread recipe can be used for many different sorts of bread that you would want to make, whether that be bread in a loaf, pizza, something like focaccia bread like this. Basically anything that uses a white bread, you just have to vary the timings of how long it goes in the oven and how you shape it in the last steps. Yeah, if you want details of exactly how to do that, we will put a few in the description. And enjoy your bread. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Cooking with Jessie, and I hope you come back for more of the recipes that I have memorized. I'll see you again soon. Bye!